Sarah Yarborough had bright red hair and an ever-present smile. She loved her 2 younger brothers and regularly helped them with their homework. Sarah was very well-rounded, with both a love of the arts and a knack for math and science. She had big dreams from a young age, and the work ethic she would need to achieve them. Her mother, Laura, described Sarah as the delight of her life, and said of her, "She made those of us around her better. She was a person who built bridges and brought people together, but in her own quiet way." The Yarboroughs had moved to Federal Way, Washington, when Sarah was 8 years old. In December of 1991, 16-year-old Sarah was a junior at Federal Way High School. She excelled academically and was an honors student. She had a very active social life, despite juggling academics and extensive extracurricular activities. Sarah had a few close friends, but often socialized in a large group, because she was friendly to everyone and attracted friends with her caring and energetic personality. The Yarboroughs were members of Bible Baptist Church, and Sarah was an active member of the church youth group. Sarah loved dance and said it made her feel fully alive. She was a member of the Safety Kids, a dance group that gave performances encouraging young people not to abuse drugs or alcohol. In the summer of 1990, she had traveled to New Zealand to perform with the group. Sarah was also a member of her school's drill team. Her dedication to the team was one of the reasons she asked her parents if she could stay home while the family went out of town on Friday, December 13th, 1991. They were traveling to Ocean Shores, some 2 hours away from their home, because one of Sarah's brothers was playing a soccer game there. Sarah had plans all weekend, including an important drill team competition, so she asked to stay behind. Her parents were reluctant to leave their teenager home alone, but ultimately agreed to let her stay under the condition that a friend come to stay with her on Friday night. Sarah spent the night of Friday the 13th at a basketball game with a group of friends. She and the friend, who would be sleeping over at Sarah's house, stopped for fast food and snacks on the way back to Sarah's house. When Sarah woke up the next morning, on December 14th, 1991, she thought she was running late for her drill team competition. She said goodbye to her friend and rushed out of the house, with curlers still in her hair, to drive to school, to meet up with the rest of the team, to board a bus to travel to Juanita High School in Kirkland for the competition. 13-year-old Drew Miller had also had a sleepover on the night of December 13th. His friend Adam spent the night at his house, and the 2 boys spent the morning of December 14th watching Saturday morning cartoons and eating cereal, before heading out to go skateboarding in the parking lot of a nearby Albertsons grocery store. Adam lived down the road from Federal Way High School and regularly jumped over a fence so he could cut through the school's campus to get to the Albertsons. He and Adam followed that routine that morning. Because it was so cold, puddles had frozen over, so the 2 boys stomped on the ice to break it as they made their way across the school grounds. When Drew looked up ahead, he saw a man come out of the bushes and start walking in the same direction he and Adam were traveling. He tried to tell himself that the man had just hidden in the bushes to smoke marijuana without being seen, but his presence still unnerved him, so he kept an eye on him as he and Adam kept walking. When Drew and Adam reached the spot where they had initially seen the man pop up from the bushes, they found something horrifying. A young woman, partially clothed, staring up at them, unmoving. When they looked back up, they saw the man up ahead, standing near a vehicle, staring them down. The 2 boys turned and ran back to Drew's house. His mother called 911, while his stepfather rushed back to the scene with Drew to see if they could help the young woman. When they arrived, they confirmed that there was nothing they could do to help her. She was soon identified as Sarah Yarborough. It turned out that Sarah had been wrong about the time she needed to be at school to catch the bus to the competition, and had actually arrived at the school early. A witness saw her pull into the school's parking lot around 8:10 a.m., but members of the drill team did not need to be there until 9. Her body had been found between 100 and 150 yards away from her car. There was no obvious reason why she would have gone down to the area, which was covered in bushes. There were also no signs of a struggle in or near her vehicle, where a large jug of orange juice Sarah had brought with her sat unspilled on the front passenger seat. Because Sarah was always willing to help anyone, including strangers, it was theorized early on that someone may have approached her asking for assistance, and she walked away from her vehicle trying to help them with something. Sarah's cause of death was found to be ligature strangulation, and her own nylon stockings were found around her neck. Police believed Sarah's murder had been sexually motivated, as semen was found on her clothing. DNA from it would eventually be found to be a match to DNA found under Sarah's fingernails and on the nylons used to strangle her. Early on in the investigation, the most important lead police had was the two boys, Adam and Drew, who had seen a man leaving the scene just after Sarah was killed. The two boys were able to work with a sketch artist to produce an image of what the man looked like, which they said was highly accurate. The sketch was posted all over town and generated thousands of calls to police, none of which led to an arrest. In June of 1993, a memorial to Sarah was dedicated in the courtyard of Federal Way High School. The stone bench was inscribed with Sarah's life motto, Carpe Diem, which means seize the day, and featured a bronze statue representing some of the things Sarah loved the most: her ballet shoes, books, and her dog Gibby. June 12, 1993 was graduation day at Federal Way High School. It also would have been Sarah's 18th birthday. Sarah had dreamed of going to a college somewhere far away from Washington to explore somewhere new. She hadn't fully settled on a career path, but was considering becoming a museum curator or an engineer, like her father. Sarah's mother, Laura, did not sit at home with her own pain on that day, instead going to the graduation ceremony to support Sarah's many friends, as Sarah would have wanted. Years passed without answers in Sarah's case, but they also brought new technology and new avenues of investigation. In December of 2011, Sarah's case made history in a field which would eventually solve her case. While other cases would be solved using consumer DNA databases and genetic genealogy before Sarah's killer was identified, Sarah's case is believed to be the first cold case to find a lead by searching consumer DNA databases. Colleen Fitzpatrick of Identifiers International was not able to identify a potential suspect by comparing the DNA from Sarah's crime scene to the DNA profiles available in commercial databases at the time. However, she also used YSTR analysis, which looks at the Y chromosome and therefore male lineage. A match was found and showed that Sarah's killer was a descendant of Robert Fuller, who lived in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1630s and whose family arrived in North America on the Mayflower. Because they shared a Y chromosome, the killer had to be a direct male descendant of Robert Fuller. The chromosome had been passed from father to son since the 17th century until Sarah's killer inherited it. Given the number of generations who had lived and died since Robert Fuller's lifetime, this still left thousands of potential suspects. The surname of Fuller did have a connection to Sarah's case. Bill Fuller was a close family friend of the Yarboroughs. He had led the effort to have the memorial to her installed at Federal Way High School. While he did not match the description of the man the two boys who found Sarah's body saw leaving the scene, police still requested that he provide a sample of his DNA, which he willingly did. It was not a match to the crime scene DNA. However, his Y chromosome was a match to the crime scene DNA and the known Fuller family, who arrived on the Mayflower. Bill Fuller was a paternal cousin of the killer, but too distant of one to identify him. Other individuals with the surname of Fuller living in the area were investigated, but not tied to Sarah's murder. Genetic genealogy continued to be utilized in the case, and in 2019, it finally narrowed down the potential suspect pool to two brothers, either of which could have been the killer based on their DNA. However, one of the brothers was then excluded because his DNA profile was already in the criminal database and found not to be a match. Police began surveilling the other brother and collected 2 cigarette butts and a napkin he discarded. A DNA profile was developed from these items. It was found to be a match to the DNA collected from Sarah's body. On October 3, 2019, a first-degree murder charge was filed against 55-year-old Patrick Leon Nicholas. The filing documents alleged that Nicholas killed Sarah while committing, or attempting to commit, the crime of rape in the 2nd degree. Nicholas was booked into King County Jail the same day, with prosecutors requesting his bail be set at $5 million. Nicholas did not have the surname of Fuller, despite being of direct male Fuller genetic lineage, as had been previously predicted, because his grandfather had been adopted. Nicholas did have a disturbing criminal history. In June of 1983, he had attacked a young woman named Ann Croney as she sat outside of her car overlooking the Columbia River in Richland, Washington. After making small talk with her for a few minutes, he held a knife to her throat as she attempted to leave. He forced her to remove her clothing and walk down closer to the river. Ann was able to escape by jumping into the water and swimming away. Nicholas then bought a plane ticket, but was identified and arrested before he could leave town. Nicholas was only 19 years old at the time of his attack on Ann, but he had been convicted of 2 rapes and an attempted rape as a juvenile. In these cases, he had used the threat of violence to get his victims away from where he first interacted with them, into a more remote area where he raped them, much like he had attempted to do to Ann. He had been released from custody for his most recent crime just a few months before he attempted to rape Ann. He pled guilty to 1 charge of first-degree attempted rape in Ann's case, and she spoke at his sentencing hearing. She requested that the judge sentence Nicholas to the maximum sentence. The judge did so, sentencing Nicholas to 10 years in prison. However, Nicholas was released after serving just 3.5 years of his 10-year sentence. Had he served his entire sentence, he would have still been incarcerated at the time of Sarah Yarborough's murder. 2 years after Sarah was murdered, at the end of 1993, he was arrested again. This time, he was charged with molesting his 6-year-old stepdaughter. Nicholas was ultimately able to plead the charges against him down to just 1 4th-degree assault charge. Despite the nature of his criminal history, Nicholas's DNA was never entered into any criminal database. According to state law, his DNA should have been entered into the combined DNA index system following the 1993 molestation arrest, but since he was able to plead down to a gross misdemeanor, he also avoided having to fulfill this requirement. That being said, it would have still been possible for Nicholas to have been identified using DNA more than a decade before he was finally arrested, were it not for limitations in place in the state of Washington. Numerous other states, as well as the United Kingdom, allow law enforcement to utilize familial DNA analysis in their investigations. The legal statutes of the state of Washington do not allow for such analysis to be utilized there. Familial DNA analysis and investigative genetic genealogy, the process which ultimately identified Nicholas, involve essentially the same process, but they are considered 2 separate investigative techniques because of one major difference. Both techniques involve comparing a DNA profile from a crime scene to other DNA profiles in a database. Investigators identify individuals who share DNA with the suspect DNA, and then work to determine how they are related based on how much DNA they share. In the majority of cases, only distant cousins are identified, meaning investigators have to use records to construct the family trees of these individuals in order to narrow down their suspect pool. The difference between investigative genetic genealogy and familial DNA analysis is that the former uses databases of customers of commercial DNA sites, who generally use these services to explore their ancestry or find long-lost relatives, and the latter uses criminal databases. In what is perhaps the most famous use of familial DNA analysis, Lonnie David Franklin Jr., the so-called Grim Sleeper, was identified because his son Christopher's DNA had been entered into the criminal database following a weapons charge and showed up as a partial match to DNA from the Grim Sleeper investigation. Patrick Nicholas has an older brother, Edward Peter Nicholas Jr., who is a convicted rapist and registered sex offender. His DNA was entered into the combined DNA index system in October of 2005, 14 years before Sarah Yarborough's case had been solved. Had familial DNA analysis been available to investigators working on Sarah's case, Patrick Nicholas would have been identified as a suspect in her case essentially instantaneously, according to investigators, because of how closely he was related to someone in the criminal database. Because familial searches are not performed by the Washington State Patrol crime labs, Patrick Nicholas remained free for 14 more years. According to Chris Loftus, the director of communications for the Washington State Patrol crime labs, familial DNA analysis is being evaluated for use in Washington state. However, the Washington state legislature has directed the labs to process the more than 9,000 backlogged rape kits in the state, placing the adoption of new techniques on the back burner for the time being. Furthermore, he maintains that familial DNA analysis presents legal, practical, and ethical issues for them to address, although the technique has not faced any major legal challenges despite widespread use in other states. Nicholas's trial began on April 17, 2023. His attorney, David Montes, based his defense of Nicholas on attacking two things: genetic genealogy and the witness testimony. He criticized the use of genetic genealogy in the case because it has only come into use so recently, although this critique did not explain how his client's DNA, which was compared directly to the crime scene DNA after he was identified using genetic genealogy, ended up on Sarah's body. Montes also argued that his client could not have been the man Drew Miller and his friend Adam saw just before they discovered Sarah's body, despite similarities between the composite sketch they helped develop and photos of Nicholas when he was younger. The boys told the sketch artist that the man they saw had uneven skin on his face, whether from acne, scarring, or dirt. Because Nicholas had clear skin at the time, Montes argued that he could not have been the man the boys saw, despite their testimony in court that they believed he was. It is also worth noting that the DNA found under Sarah's fingernails, as well as other evidence found at the crime scene, indicates that she fought fiercely against her killer. It is therefore possible that she may have scratched him on the face. While this is just a theory, the textured skin Adam and Drew reported seeing on Nicholas may have actually been scratch marks left by Sarah as she tried to fight him off. The trial went on for 2.5 weeks. Jurors deliberated for a day and a half before returning with a verdict on May 10, 2023. They had been sent into deliberation with 3 charges to consider: premeditated first-degree murder committed during the commission of an attempted rape, and the lesser charge of second-degree murder while also committing indecent liberties. They found Nicholas not guilty of the first charge, but guilty of the remaining 2. Nicholas's sentencing hearing was held on May 25, 2023. His lawyer argued for a sentence of 20 years in prison. Because the jury had returned a special verdict finding that Sarah's killing was sexually motivated, King County Superior Court Judge Josephine Wiggs instead handed down the sentence recommended by prosecutors, more than 45.5 years. This sentence all but ensures that Nicholas will die while incarcerated. Nicholas plans to file an appeal. While decades had passed between the time when Sarah was murdered and when Nicholas was sentenced, dozens of people connected to Sarah and to her case were present at the sentencing hearing. Anne Croney, who had been attacked by Nicholas in 1983, had not been allowed to testify at his trial, but came to give a victim impact statement. Sarah's family members and numerous friends also gave statements, detailing how the passage of time had not diminished the love they felt for Sarah, or the agony they felt over her loss.